homeless. With $10, she bought a forgotten inn. Her dog refused to enter, then found what was hidden below. The door opened with a slow drag, like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, the air held onto something, stone, ash, and a quiet that didn't feel empty. Elena stepped in anyway. She had nowhere else to go, but Koda didn't follow. He stood at the threshold, staring at the floor, as if something down there was already waiting. Would you have walked inside, or listened to the dog? The door clicked shut behind her. Not slammed, not dramatic, just a soft, final sound, like something small breaking. Elena Varga stood on the cracked concrete walkway, her hands still curled as if she were holding something that wasn't there anymore. The late afternoon light stretched long across the row of duplexes, catching on chipped paint and rusted railings. A loose gutter knocked softly against the siding in the wind. Inside, she could hear movement, drawers opening, footsteps crossing the floor she used to clean every morning. Her daughter didn't come back out. Elena didn't expect her to. At her feet, 2 black trash bags leaned against the railing. One tied too tight, the plastic stretched thin at the knot. The other barely closed, a sleeve of an old sweater pushing against the opening like it was trying to breathe. That was everything. 40 years of living in one place, reduced to what could be carried in both hands. She didn't cry. It wasn't that she couldn't. It was that the feeling hadn't reached her yet. It hovered somewhere just out of reach, like a word you almost remember. Beside her, Koda shifted his weight. The German shepherd pressed closer, his shoulder brushing against her leg, steady and warm. His ears were up, eyes moving, not nervously, not wildly, just watching. The street, the windows, the people who passed by pretending not to look. A man across the road slowed for half a second, then kept walking. A car drove past too fast for a residential street. Koda's gaze followed it until it disappeared around the corner. Then he looked up at Elena, quiet, waiting. "I know," she said, though she wasn't sure what she was answering. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and old rain. This part of town used to hum. Factories, trucks, people heading somewhere. Now it felt paused, half abandoned, like the rest of the world had moved a few miles over and forgotten to come back. Elena adjusted her coat, pulling it tighter even though it wasn't cold enough to need it. Habit, maybe, or comfort. She reached into her pocket and felt the folded bills. Thin, too thin. $10. She had counted it 3 times already. Not because she thought it would change, but because it was the only number left that made any sense. $10 and nowhere to go. The thought didn't land all at once. It came in pieces. A slow realization, like stepping into water 1 inch at a time until suddenly it was at your waist. Behind her, a curtain shifted in the front window. Just a flicker. Then stillness again. Elena turned her back to the house. There was nothing left there for her. The sidewalk stretched out in both directions, empty except for a rusted mailbox and a faded bus stop sign at the corner. She picked up one of the bags. The plastic cut into her fingers more than she expected. The other followed, heavier than it should have been. Koda moved with her immediately, close at her side, never pulling ahead. They walked without speaking. Not that there was anyone to speak to. At the corner, the wind picked up, carrying a loose flyer across the pavement. It caught briefly against Elena's shoe before sliding away. She watched it go for a second, then looked up. The bus stop shelter stood just ahead. Plexiglass scratched and cloudy. A bench inside with one missing slat. The metal frame painted a dull green that had faded to something softer over the years. She stepped inside, setting the bags down carefully, as if they might fall apart if handled too roughly. Koda circled once, then sat facing outward, guarding without being told. Elena lowered herself onto the bench. The wood creaked under her weight. For a moment, she just sat there. No plan, no direction. Cars passed occasionally, but no one stopped. No one asked questions. That was how things worked now. People kept moving. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands hanging loose, the kind of posture that came when there was nothing left to hold on to. Then her eyes drifted to the side of the shelter. There was a bulletin board bolted to the metal frame, layers of paper pinned and torn, overlapping each other in uneven rows. Yard sales, lost pets, handwritten phone numbers curling at the edges. Something near the bottom caught her attention. A plain white sheet. No color. No bold headline. Just typed words. Elena stood slowly, stepping closer. Koda rose with her, his nose brushing lightly against her coat, before he turned to scan the street again. She reached out and flattened the paper against the board, smoothing the corner where it had started to peel. County surplus property, it read. Her eyes moved down the page, slower now. One listing, simple. Stone structure. Approximately 1,700 square feet. Rural access road. Former Stagecoach Inn. Condition unknown. Price $10. She blinked once, read it again. $10. The same number in her pocket. No explanation, no photograph. Just a location and a contact at the county office. Behind her, a truck rattled past, the sound echoing through the empty street. Koda shifted again. This time his ears angled slightly, not toward the road, but toward the paper. Elena noticed it. She didn't know why. It was just a small thing, a movement, but it stayed with her longer than it should have. She took a step back, looking at the paper from a distance now. An abandoned Stagecoach Inn. No one wants. The words sat there quietly, like they had been waiting. Elena reached into her pocket again, fingers closing around the folded bills. $10. She looked down at Koda. He looked back. Not wagging, not restless, just steady. Waiting. Well, she said softly, almost to herself. Then she pulled the paper free from the board. The pin dropped to the ground with a faint click. Neither of them moved to pick it up. They didn't need it anymore. Elena folded the paper once, then again, careful along the edges, as if it might tear if she rushed it. The ink had already begun to fade in places. Cheap print. Something meant to be overlooked. She slipped it into her coat pocket beside the $10. The county office wasn't far. She remembered where it was, down past the old courthouse, near the building with the clock that hadn't worked in years. She had walked those streets before, back when errands had a purpose. Now she just followed the direction printed on the page. Koda walked close, his shoulder brushing her leg with every few steps, not pulling, not lagging, just there. The town shifted as they moved. Storefronts gave way to empty windows. The sidewalks narrowed, cracked open in places where weeds had pushed through. A laundromat hummed softly behind a fogged glass door. A man inside glanced up as she passed, then looked back down at the turning machines. No one spoke. The county building came into view slowly. A squat brick structure with a flag out front that hung limp in the still air. The paint around the entrance door was worn where hands had pushed it open over the years. Elena paused at the steps. She reached into her pocket again. The paper. The money. both still there. Koda sat beside her without being told, his eyes scanning the parking lot. A white pickup idled near the curb. A woman inside it talked on her phone, her voice rising and falling behind the glass. Elena pushed the door open. Inside, the air was cooler. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The smell was familiar: paper, dust, something chemical from the cleaning solution they used on the floors. A counter ran along the far wall, with 3 windows behind it. Only one was open. A man stood there, flipping through a stack of forms, late 60s maybe, gray hair thinning at the crown, glasses resting low on his nose. He didn't look up right away. Elena stepped forward, the sound of her shoes soft against the tile. "Excuse me," she said. The man glanced up. His eyes moved from her face to Koda, then back again. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly. Not unkind, just aware. "Yes, ma'am." She pulled the folded paper from her pocket and slid it across the counter. "I'm here about this." He looked at it, didn't touch it at first. Then he picked it up slowly, smoothing it flat against the counter with his palm. His eyes scanned the lines, once, then again. "You're interested in this property?" "Yes." He nodded once, but didn't reach for any forms. "You've seen it before?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "No." There was a pause. The man adjusted his glasses, looking at her more carefully now, taking in the coat, the worn edges of the sleeves, the way she stood, not quite tired, but close to it. "It's out past County Road 16, he said. "You'd have to go a ways off the main road. Not much out there anymore." "I can walk." Another pause. This one longer. Koda shifted slightly, his ears lifting just a fraction. Not toward the man, but toward something behind the counter. A back room, maybe. A door that wasn't fully closed. The man noticed the movement. His gaze flicked to the dog, then back to Elena. "It's been empty a long time," he said, his voice quieter now. "Structure's still standing, last I heard, but there's a reason it's on surplus." Elena didn't ask what the reason was. She just waited. The silence stretched a moment too long. Finally, he sighed and reached for a drawer beneath the counter. He pulled out a thin stack of papers, setting them down with a soft thud. $10, he said, almost like he was reminding himself. Elena nodded. She took the bills from her pocket and placed them on the counter, flattened them with her palm the same way he had done with the paper. The man looked at the money, then at her. "You sure about this?" he asked. It wasn't casual. It wasn't routine. He was asking something else. Elena didn't look away. He held her gaze for a second longer, then nodded once as if something had settled. "All right." The process didn't take long. A signature here, initials there. The scratch of a pen on paper sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. Koda remained still the entire time, watching. When it was done, the man disappeared briefly into the back room. The door creaked as it opened wider. Something metallic clinked softly out of sight. Koda's head turned sharply toward the sound. Ears forward, body alert. The man returned with a key. It was heavier than Elena expected. Iron, worn smooth in places where fingers had held it over the years. He set it on the counter between them. "The old Stagecoach Inn," he said. "Been a long time since anyone asked for it." Elena reached out and picked it up. The metal was cool against her palm. As she turned to leave, the door opened behind her. A man stepped in, lighting a cigarette just outside before pushing it open with his shoulder. Mid-50s, jacket zipped halfway, boots scuffed from use. He paused when he saw her. Then his eyes dropped to the key in her hand. "Don't tell me," he said, exhaling smoke through a half-smile. "You just bought that place." Elena didn't answer right away. Koda shifted closer to her leg. The man shook his head, chuckling under his breath. "That place doesn't stay empty for no reason," he muttered. He stepped past her, brushing the door open wider. The smoke followed him inside. Elena stood there for a second. Then she stepped out into the light. Koda followed, his ears still slightly raised. The key felt heavier now, not just in her hand, but somewhere deeper. And for the first time since she picked up the paper, she wondered what she had just walked into. The road out of town narrowed faster than she expected. Sidewalks disappeared first. Then the houses thinned. What was left of the town gave way to open stretches of dry grass and broken fencing, the kind that leaned instead of stood. The pavement cracked into long seams, patches of gravel filling the gaps where the road had given up. Elena walked steadily, one step at a time, the iron key tucked deep in her coat pocket. It tapped lightly against her leg with each movement, a quiet reminder. Koda stayed close, closer than before. His body angled just slightly toward her, as if guiding her without pulling. Every so often, he would stop, turn his head, listen. Not to the wind, not to the distant hum of the highway. Something else, something she couldn't hear. They passed a rusted road sign half buried in weeds. The lettering had faded, but the arrow still pointed forward. The farther they went, the quieter it became. No cars, no voices, just the sound of their steps and the faint movement of grass brushing against itself in the breeze. By the time the sun began to lower, the main road had turned into a narrower path, barely wide enough for a vehicle. Tire tracks pressed into the dirt, but not recent ones. Elena slowed when she saw it. At first, it didn't look like much, just a shape against the horizon, stone against sky. But as she got closer, the details began to pull into focus. The inn sat on a slight rise, surrounded by uneven ground and patches of dry brush. The structure was larger than she imagined. 2 stories, thick limestone walls, weathered but still holding. A roof that sagged just slightly at one corner, but hadn't collapsed. It wasn't falling apart. It was just left. Koda stopped. Not fully. Just enough that Elena felt the shift through the leash she wasn't holding. His paws pressed into the dirt. His ears rose. His body stiffened, not in fear, but in caution. "It's all right," she said quietly. But her voice didn't carry the certainty it should have. They stood there for a moment, just looking. The windows were dark, not broken, just clouded over, as if something had settled on them from the inside. The front porch stretched across the width of the building, its wooden boards gray and worn, one corner slightly dipped. A door stood at the center, closed, waiting. Elena took a step forward. Koda followed, but slower now. His head lowered slightly, nose testing the air. The smell reached her before she touched the door. Damp stone. Old ash. Something faintly burnt, like a fire that had gone out a long time ago but never fully left. She climbed the porch steps carefully. The wood creaked under her weight, not breaking, just protesting the sudden use after years of stillness. Her hand rested on the door. The wood was cold, colder than the air around it. She pulled the key from her pocket. The metal caught the last of the sunlight, dull and worn. For a second, she hesitated. Then she turned it. The lock gave with a soft click. The door opened inward with a slow, dragging sound, as if the hinges needed to remember how to move. The air inside felt different. Still. Heavy. Elena stepped in. The room was wide, larger than it looked from the outside. The floorboards stretched across the space in long, uneven lines. A stone hearth dominated the far wall, blackened with soot, its opening wide enough to stand inside. The light from the doorway barely reached the back of the room. It didn't feel empty. It felt paused, like something had been happening here once, and then stopped without being finished. Elena set her bags down near the wall. The sound echoed more than it should have. Koda didn't follow her in. She turned. He stood at the threshold, just outside the door, his front paws on the edge of the wood, but not crossing fully into the room. His body leaned forward, but his weight stayed back. "Koda," she called softly. He looked at her, then past her. His gaze moved across the floor, slow and deliberate, stopping somewhere near the center of the room. His ears twitched. His nose lifted slightly. He didn't move. Elena waited. Then she stepped back toward him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "It's all right," she said again. This time, he took one step forward. Then another. But he didn't relax. He moved along the edge of the room, staying close to the wall, his body low, his eyes still tracking something she couldn't see. Elena let him be. She walked deeper into the space, her footsteps slow, testing each board before putting her full weight down. The floor held, solid enough. Dust coated everything, not thick, but settled, undisturbed. She reached the hearth. The stone was dark, layered with years of soot. She ran her fingers along the edge. The surface was rough, cold. When she pulled her hand back, a faint black smudge marked her fingertips. A fire had lived here once, for a long time. Behind her, Koda shifted. She turned. He had stopped again. This time his attention wasn't on the door. It was on the floor, near the center of the room. He took a step closer, then paused. His head tilted slightly, as if listening. Then he lowered his nose, hovering just above the wood without touching it. A low sound slipped from his throat. Not a bark, not even a growl. Just something held back. Elena watched him. The room felt colder now. Not the kind of cold that came from outside, but the kind that settled in places that hadn't been touched in a long time. She moved toward him slowly. "What is it?" she asked. Koda didn't look at her. He stayed fixed on that spot. Elena took another step. The floor beneath her foot gave a faint, hollow sound. She froze. It wasn't loud, but it was different. She shifted her weight slightly, testing it again. The same sound. Subtle, but not solid. Koda stepped back, just enough to give her space, but he didn't leave the area. His body stayed tense, ready. Elena looked down. The boards didn't look different. Same age, same wear. But something about the space felt off. She exhaled slowly, then straightened. "Not tonight," she murmured. Her voice sounded small in the room. She turned away, moving back toward her bags. The light outside was fading. The room darkened quickly once the sun dropped behind the horizon. She closed the door, the sound echoing softly through the space. Koda stayed close to her now, closer than before. That night, as she settled against the wall with her coat pulled tight around her, the sounds began faint at first. A soft shifting. Not above. Below. Too steady to be the wind. Too measured to be nothing at all. Koda's head lifted before each one. Every time. As if he knew it was coming. Elena lay still. Eyes open in the dark. Listening. The building didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something was still there. Waiting. Beneath her. Elena didn't move. The sound came again, faint, deliberate, not loud enough to name but too steady to ignore. A soft shift, then stillness, then another, like something adjusting its weight in a place she couldn't see. Koda was already awake. He didn't spring up, didn't bark. He simply lifted his head before each sound, his ears angling forward, his body tightening just enough to be ready. It was the kind of alertness that didn't panic. It measured. Elena pushed herself up slowly, her back protesting from the hard floor. The room was darker now. The last of the light had drained from the windows, leaving only the faint outline of shapes, walls, beams, the wide mouth of the old hearth. The air had changed. Colder. Not just from the night outside, but deeper. A cold that seemed to come from the stone itself. She rubbed her hands together, then held them close to her chest. The coat wasn't enough. Not here. Another sound. Closer this time. Not louder, but clearer. Koda stood. He moved between her and the center of the room without being told, his body angled outward, his stance firm. His tail stayed low, not tucked, not relaxed. Guarding. Elena watched him. She had seen him alert before, at the edge of a yard, near strangers, in places where something felt off. But this was different. He wasn't reacting. He was anticipating. Each time the sound came, he was already listening for it. "How do you know?" she whispered. He didn't turn. His focus stayed fixed on the same place, the middle of the floor, the same spot he had stopped at earlier, the same spot that gave that hollow sound when she stepped near it. The boards didn't move, didn't creak. But something beneath them did. Elena pulled her legs in closer, wrapping her arms around them for warmth. The cold pressed in from all sides now, the kind that settled into joints and stayed there. She glanced toward the door closed, solid. For a moment, the thought crossed her mind. To leave. To take the bags, step back out into the open air, find somewhere else to sit until morning. But somewhere else didn't exist. Not anymore. So she stayed. Koda shifted his position again, circling once before lowering himself just in front of her, not fully relaxed. His head stayed up, eyes still scanning the room. Every few minutes, his ears twitched, catching something she couldn't. The sounds continued. Not constant, not predictable, just enough to keep her from settling. A slow scrape, then silence. A faint thump, then nothing. Time stretched. Minutes didn't feel like minutes. They felt longer, looser, uncertain. Elena tried to lie back. It didn't work. Her body wouldn't release the tension. Every small noise pulled her attention back to the same place. The floor. That spot. She looked at it now, though she could barely see it in the dark. Just a shadow among shadows. Still, waiting. At some point, she realized Koda hadn't made a sound. Not a bark, not even a sharp breath. Just that low, controlled presence, like he was holding something back. The kind of restraint that comes from knowing more than you can explain. Another shift. This one closer. Elena's breath caught. Koda's body tensed instantly, muscles tightening beneath his coat. A low growl slipped from him this time. Quiet, steady, not loud enough to echo, just enough to warn. Not aggressive, protective. Elena reached out, her hand finding the back of his neck. His fur was warm under her fingers, solid, real. "I'm here," she murmured. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. The growl faded, but the tension stayed. Koda leaned slightly into her touch, but his eyes never left the floor. The hours passed slowly. At some point, the sounds grew less frequent. Not gone, just farther apart. The building settled, or whatever was beneath it did. Elena's eyes burned from staying open too long. Her body sagged forward, exhaustion creeping in, whether she allowed it or not. She dozed. Not fully asleep, just enough to drift. Each time she slipped, something pulled her back. A sound, a shift, Koda moving slightly beside her. And each time she opened her eyes, he was already awake, already watching. The first hint of morning came quietly. A thin gray light pushing through the edges of the windows. The kind of light that doesn't warm anything, but tells you the night is over. Elena lifted her head slowly, her neck stiff, her hands cold. The room looked different now. Still worn, still empty, but clearer. The spot on the floor stood out more in the daylight, not because it looked different, but because she was looking for it now. Koda stood as soon as she moved. He stretched once, then turned immediately toward the center of the room again. Same place, same focus. He stepped forward slowly, his nose lowering toward the boards. He didn't touch them, just hovered. Then he looked back at her. Not confused, not afraid. Certain. Elena pushed herself to her feet. Her legs protested, but she stood. She took one step toward him, then another. The floor creaked softly under her weight. She stopped just short of the spot. The air felt colder there, not by much, but enough to notice. Koda circled once, tight and controlled, then lowered his head again. His nose hovered just above the wood, his breath steady. Then he scratched. Once, not frantic, not wild, deliberate, a single motion. The sound echoed differently. Hollow. Elena froze. She looked down at the boards, same wood, same age, but now she could hear it, feel it. Something wasn't solid. Something was below. Koda scratched again, then stopped. He didn't keep digging. He just stood there, waiting, watching her. Elena exhaled slowly. The night hadn't given her answers, but it had taken something else. The part of her that still thought this place was just empty. She looked down at the floor, then at the dog, then back again. And for the first time since she stepped inside the inn, she knew she wasn't imagining it. There was something down there, and Koda had known it before she ever walked through the door. Elena didn't speak. She stood over the spot, her breath slow, controlled, as if even the air might disturb whatever waited beneath the boards. Morning light spread thin across the floor, catching dust in the air, turning it into something visible. Koda scratched again. Same place. Same motion. Deliberate. Not digging to get through. Not frantic. Pointing. Elena crouched carefully, lowering herself down until her knees touched the wood. The boards were colder here. Not by much, but enough to settle into her palms when she pressed them down. She knocked lightly. The sound came back different. Not the dull, solid thud of the rest of the floor. This one carried a hollow note beneath it. She moved her hand a few inches to the side. Knocked again. Solid. Back to the center. Hollow. Koda let out a soft whine, shifting his weight from one paw to the other, then back again. His eyes never left her hands. "I hear it," she said quietly. Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. The room held onto it. She sat back on her heels, looking around the space. There were no tools in sight. Nothing obvious. Just the same worn boards. The same quiet walls. But now the room felt different. Focused. Like everything in it led back to that one place. Koda stepped closer, his nose brushing the floor, then lifting again. He circled once, tight, then returned to the same spot, pressing his paw down firmly before pulling it back. Again. Again. Always the same place. Elena watched him. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't reacting to something random. He knew. She stood slowly, her joints stiff from the cold night. Her gaze moved across the room, searching now with purpose. Near the far wall, close to the hearth, something caught her attention. A length of metal leaned against the stone, rusted, half buried under dust and debris. She walked over. It was a pry bar. Old, heavy, the handle worn smooth in places where it had been held before. She picked it up. The weight surprised her. Solid. Real. Koda turned immediately, his attention snapping back to her, then to the center of the room. He moved ahead of her this time, not hesitating, not stopping at the doorway, straight to the spot. He stood there, waiting. Elena returned slowly, the pry bar held low in her hand. Each step felt heavier now, not from the tool but from the understanding settling in. Whatever was below, this wasn't an accident. She stopped at the edge of the boards. Koda stepped aside just enough to give her space, but stayed close, close enough that she could feel the heat from him against her leg. Elena lowered the tip of the pry bar to the seam between two boards. The wood didn't give right away. It resisted. Dry, tight, holding on to itself after years of not being touched. She adjusted her grip, pressing harder this time. The metal scraped softly against the wood. A small crack formed. Koda stiffened. His ears rose, his body going still again, like he was listening for something beyond the surface. Elena paused, listened. Nothing. Just the faint sound of wind brushing against the outside of the building. She pushed again. This time the board shifted slightly. A small movement, but enough. The sound it made echoed differently. Hollow. Koda stepped back half a pace, then forward again, unable to stay still. Elena wedged the bar deeper into the gap, using her weight now. The wood creaked, then gave. A sharp, dry crack split the air as the first board lifted slightly at one end. Dust rose with it. The smell hit her immediately. Not rot, not decay, something else. Dry earth, old wood, stillness. She pulled the bar free, repositioned it, and worked along the edge. The board lifted a little more each time, resisting less with every movement. Her hands began to ache. Her breathing deepened. Koda stayed close, shifting his weight, watching every motion. When the board finally came loose, it didn't fall. It lifted pulling. Reluctantly. Elena set the pry bar aside and gripped the edge with both hands. The wood was rough under her fingers. She pulled. The board came free. Underneath, Darkness. Not shadow. Not just a gap. Depth. A narrow opening between the beams, wide enough to see through, but not yet wide enough to enter. A breath of air rose from below. Cold. Dry. Different from the rest of the room. Koda stepped back. Not in fear. In recognition. He stopped growling. Stopped whining. He just stood there, his body still, his eyes fixed on the opening. Waiting. Elena leaned forward slightly, peering into the space. She couldn't see much, just stone, and the suggestion of something deeper. She exhaled slowly. Her heart beat heavier now. Not from fear, from certainty. This was it. This was what had been beneath her all night, what had been shifting, what Koda had felt before she ever understood. She reached for the pry bar again. More boards. She would need to remove more. But for a moment, she didn't move. She just looked down into the opening. The cold air continued to rise, brushing against her face, carrying that same scent. Earth, wood. Something kept. Koda stepped closer again, but this time he didn't touch the floor. He sat. Right beside the opening, not guarding, not warning, just waiting. As if whatever was below was meant to be found. Elena didn't rush. She sat back on her heels, breathing steady, letting the moment settle instead of pushing through it. The opening in the floor wasn't large, just enough to show that the space beneath was real, not imagined. Koda didn't move. He stayed seated beside the gap, his body relaxed in a way it hadn't been since they arrived. No tension in his shoulders, no warning in his posture. Just watchful. Elena noticed that. The fear from the night before, the sharp edge of it, had softened. Not gone, but changed. This wasn't something chasing them. It was something waiting. She reached for the pry bar again. The next board came up easier, then another. Each one loosened the space, widening the opening, letting more of that cool, dry air rise into the room. It brushed against her face, carrying the same scent. Earth, aged wood, something preserved rather than forgotten. Her hands grew dirty, streaked with dust and splinters. The boards resisted less now, as if time had already done most of the work for her. Koda shifted once, stepping closer, then stopping just at the edge. He leaned forward slightly, nose hovering above the opening. Still no growl, still no fear. That steadiness gave her something she hadn't had before. Confidence. When the gap was wide enough, Elena set the last board aside and leaned over the opening. This time she could see more. Stone walls. Not rough, broken stone, but shaped, fitted. Old, but deliberate. The space below wasn't a collapse. It was a room. She found a narrow beam running along the edge and gripped it with one hand, lowering her head further into the opening. The light from above reached down just enough to reveal the top of a short stone stairway descending into the dark. A cellar. Koda let out a slow breath behind her. Not a sigh. Something quieter. Relieved. Elena pulled back, sitting again, letting the realization settle. A hidden cellar beneath the floor. Hidden well enough that someone had sealed it back up and left it that way. She looked around the room instinctively, as if expecting something to change now that she knew. But the inn remained still. The same walls, the same silence. Only now, it felt deeper. She stood carefully, brushing dust from her hands onto her coat. "We're not leaving it like this," she said under her breath. Koda's ears flicked at her voice. She stepped toward the hearth and searched along the stone, finding a small metal hook embedded in the wall. Hanging from it was an old lantern, its glass clouded, its handle rusted but intact. She took it down, shook it lightly. A faint slosh inside. Fuel. Not much, but enough. She struck the flint against the striker she found nearby, the sound sharp in the quiet room. It took 2 tries, then 3. On the 4th, a small spark caught. The flame grew slowly, weak at first, then steadier. Warm light filled the space around her, pushing back the shadows just enough. Koda stepped closer immediately, drawn to the glow. Elena carried the lantern back to the opening and held it out over the gap. The light dropped down the stone steps, illuminating them one by one. Worn. Even. Used. The walls reflected the glow softly, revealing more of the space below. Shelves, shapes, the outline of something larger against the far wall. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. It was quiet, still. Elena took a breath, then another. She set the lantern down at the edge and gripped the sides of the opening. Her foot found the first step. Solid. She shifted her weight slowly, testing it, still solid. Koda stood up immediately. His body moved forward, but he didn't jump down. He waited, watching her. Elena lowered herself carefully, one step at a time, the lantern's light guiding her descent. The air changed as she went down. Cooler. Drier. Quieter in a different way. Not empty, but contained. Her boots touched the cellar floor. Packed earth. Firm. She stood there for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. The room wasn't large, but it was complete. Stone walls on all sides. A low ceiling with wooden beams running across it. Shelves lined one wall. Empty now, but still standing. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked broken. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt closed, like someone had finished with it and left it exactly as it should be. Elena turned slowly, taking it in. Then she saw it. Against the far wall. A metal box. Rectangular, heavy-looking, the kind built to last. Beside it, something wrapped in cloth. And next to that, a few tools laid out in a neat line, untouched. Her breath slowed again. She hadn't expected order. Koda made a soft sound above her. She looked up. He stood at the edge of the opening, looking down at her, his head tilted slightly. "Stay," she said gently. He didn't move, didn't argue. He just watched. Elena turned back to the room. The lantern light flickered across the metal box, catching on its edges. Dust had settled, but lightly, not buried, preserved. She took a step toward it, then stopped. Not from fear. From the feeling that whatever this was, it had been waiting a long time. And now that she had found it, there was no need to rush. Behind her, the faint light from above filtered down through the opening. Koda remained still, silent. For the first time since they arrived at the inn, he wasn't warning her anymore. He was letting her go forward. Elena took another step into the cellar. The lantern light moved with her, stretching shadows across the stone walls, then pulling them back again. The air down here didn't carry the same weight as the room above. It felt settled, preserved. She moved slowly, her boots pressing into the packed earth floor. No dust cloud rose, no loose debris shifted. Everything held its place. The metal box sat against the far wall, exactly where she had first seen it. Square, solid, its surface dulled with age but not corroded, not broken. Next to it, a bundle wrapped in thick cloth rested carefully, as if someone had set it down with intention. Beside that, a row of tools, iron, worn smooth at the grips, lined up with quiet precision. Nothing here looked abandoned. It looked finished. Elena stopped a few feet away. Her breathing slowed. There was no urgency now, no sense of something about to move or vanish, only the quiet presence of things left behind. Above her, Koda shifted slightly. She could hear the faint scrape of his paws against the wood floor, then stillness again. "I'm here," she said softly, more for him than herself. The sound didn't echo. It stayed close. Elena crouched near the metal box. Up close, she could see faint markings along the edge, small scratches, not damage but use. The latch at the front was simple, no lock, just a clasp. She rested her fingers on it, cold, but not brittle. She hesitated for a moment, then lifted it. The latch opened with a quiet click that felt louder than it should have. She paused again, listened. Nothing. No movement, no shift. Only the steady quiet of the cellar. She lifted the lid. It didn't creak. Inside, the contents were arranged carefully, as if someone had placed each piece with time and thought. Coins, small stacks of them, dull gold catching the lantern light in soft reflections, not scattered, not hidden. Counted. Beside them, folded documents tied with a thin strip of cloth, the edges worn but intact. And beneath that, a letter. Thicker paper, yellowed slightly with age, folded cleanly in half. Elena didn't touch anything at first. She just looked. This wasn't what she expected, not in the way most people would think. There was no sense of chaos, no sense of someone hiding in a hurry. Everything here had been left, properly. She reached in slowly, lifting one of the coins between her fingers. It was heavier than it looked. Solid. Real. She turned it slightly, catching the faint outline of a stamped date. Old. Older than anything she had ever held. She set it back exactly where it had been. Then she reached for the documents. The cloth untied easily, the fabric soft from time rather than worn out. Inside, several pages rested, each one folded carefully. She opened the first. The handwriting was neat, precise, the kind that came from someone who took their time. Legal text, ownership records, names, dates. Her eyes moved across the lines slowly, not fully understanding everything at once, but recognizing enough. This place hadn't been forgotten. It had been held. She turned to the next page. More records. Signatures, stamps. The paper felt thick between her fingers, like it had been made to last. Then she reached for the letter. Her hand paused just above it. Something about it felt different. Not heavier, but more personal. She picked it up carefully. The fold opened easily, the crease still holding its shape. The handwriting inside matched the documents, but this wasn't legal. This was written to be read. Elena didn't speak. She just stood there, the lantern light steady in her other hand, illuminating the page. Above her, Koda made a soft sound. Not a warning, not a question, just a quiet acknowledgement. She glanced up briefly. He was still there, still watching, still calm. She looked back down at the letter. The words were clear, deliberate, not rushed, as if whoever had written them had known exactly what they were doing. Exactly why. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not even surprise. Something closer to recognition, like stepping into a place that had been waiting longer than she understood. She lowered the letter slightly, her eyes moving back across the room. The tools, the shelves, the box, all of it placed with care, not hidden to be lost, hidden to be found. She exhaled slowly, then folded the letter back along its crease, not putting it away, not yet, just holding it. Above her, the light from the opening stretched faintly into the cellar, marking the way back up. But for the first time since she stepped inside the inn, Elena didn't feel like she had walked into something unknown. She felt like she had stepped into something that had been waiting. And now it was no longer hidden. Elena stood in the cellar, the letter still in her hands, the lantern light steady but soft. The air felt different now, not heavier, not lighter clear. She unfolded the paper again. This time she read. The handwriting was firm, careful, not hurried, each word placed as if it mattered where it landed. She moved slowly, her eyes tracing each line. The letter wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. It began with a name. Not one she recognized at first. Then the next line shifted something. A reference to the inn, to the land, to a dispute. Her brow tightened slightly as she read further. Legal pressure, claims filed, ownership challenged, not by strangers, but by people who had seen value where others had not. The letter explained it simply. The owner, decades ago, had been warned the property would be taken, quietly, through paperwork, through absence, through time. If no one stood for it, it would pass into other hands without resistance. So he closed it. Not abandoned. Closed, deliberately. Elena's fingers tightened slightly on the page. She continued reading. The cellar had been sealed with purpose. The documents preserved below, not just records, but proof of ownership, proof of continuity, names tied to the land in ways that could not be easily erased. The coins. Not wealth for escape, but enough to hold the place, to maintain it, to survive until it could be claimed again. Her breath slowed. The words settled deeper now. This had not been forgotten. It had been protected. She turned the page slightly, her eyes catching the final section. A name. One she recognized. Not immediately, but enough to pull something from memory. Her late husband had mentioned it once, years ago, in passing. A story about his grandfather working land outside town, before everything changed, before they moved, before life shifted in ways that never quite returned. Elena stood still. The connection wasn't loud. It didn't explain everything. But it was there. A line running quietly through time. She read the final lines again. Not instructions. Not demands. Just a statement. If someone finds this, if someone chooses to stay, then let the truth stand with them. Elena lowered the letter slowly. The cellar seemed quieter now, as if it had been waiting for those words to be read. Above her, Koda shifted again. She looked up. He was still at the edge, still watching, but his body was different now. Relaxed. The tension from before had faded. His ears were no longer fixed forward. He blinked slowly, then lay down near the opening, his front paws stretched out, his head resting between them. Waiting, but no longer guarding. Elena turned back to the box. The coins, the documents, the tools, everything placed with care. Nothing hidden out of fear. Everything left with intention. She stepped closer again, her hand hovering briefly over the contents, before resting gently on the edge of the box. Her reflection flickered faintly in the metal surface, distorted by age and light. For a moment, she saw herself not as she had been standing outside the duplex, but as she was now. Here, inside something that had been waiting. Her chest tightened, not from fear, from the weight of understanding settling in. This place had not rejected her. It had not pushed her out. It had not turned her away. It had been empty. Until now, she folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the box, not tucked away, not hidden again, but returned with the same care it had been left. The documents followed. The cloth tied loosely, not sealed. The lid lowered slowly. It closed with a quiet, final sound, not an ending. A pause. Elena picked up the lantern and turned toward the stairs. The steps looked the same as before, but she didn't hesitate this time. She climbed slowly, one hand steady on the stone wall, the light guiding her back up. Koda rose as she reached the top. He stepped back to give her space, then moved in beside her as soon as she cleared the opening. His shoulder pressed lightly against her leg, warm, real. She set the lantern down near the edge of the floor and looked back into the opening. The cellar remained still, unchanged, but no longer unknown. Elena stood there for a moment, her gaze steady. Then she reached down and pulled one of the boards closer. Not to close it completely, just enough to cover part of the opening, enough to mark it, enough to remember. Koda circled once and then lay down beside her again, his body angled toward the center of the room, but relaxed now. No tension, no warning. The room above felt different too. The cold hadn't left. The walls hadn't changed. But something in the space had shifted. It no longer felt like a place she had entered. It felt like a place that had opened. Elena sat back down against the wall, her coat still wrapped tight around her. Her hands rested in her lap, still carrying the faint dust from the cellar. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth wasn't something that demanded noise. It settled quietly, like the building itself. And for the first time since she had stepped onto the property, Elena didn't feel like she was standing on something uncertain. She felt like she was standing on something that had been waiting to be claimed. Morning came softer the next day. Not quiet. The wind still moved through the cracks. The boards still creaked when she shifted her weight, but softer in a way that settled differently in her chest. She didn't rush. There was no need to. Koda was already awake when she opened her eyes. Not alert this time, just watching the doorway, his head resting low between his paws. When she sat up, he rose without tension, stretching slowly, then stepping closer, as if to check she was still there. "I'm still here," she said. Her voice carried more steadiness now. She stood, brushing dust from her coat, then walked toward the center of the room. The boards she had lifted remained off to the side, the opening partially covered the way she left it. She didn't uncover it again. Not yet. Instead, she turned her attention to the rest of the room, the walls, the hearth, the space. It had felt abandoned when she first stepped inside. Now it felt unused. There was a difference. Elena moved to the hearth. The stone was blackened but solid, The wide opening still framed the space like it had once held something constant. Heat, light, purpose. She crouched slightly, brushing away loose debris near the edge. Beneath it, the stone held firm. Koda wandered slowly across the room, no longer hugging the walls. He moved with quiet confidence, stopping occasionally to sniff at corners, then continuing without hesitation. No growling. No warning. Just presence. Elena found a broken crate near the far wall and dragged it closer to the hearth. The wood scraped against the floor, the sound echoing briefly before settling into silence again. She stepped outside. The air was cooler than she expected, but cleaner. The open land stretched in every direction, dry grass bending in the wind. Near the side of the building, a pile of fallen branches lay scattered, some dry enough to break with a simple twist. She gathered what she could carry. Not much, just enough. Back inside, she arranged the wood carefully in the hearth, smaller pieces first, then thicker ones across the top. Her hands moved slowly, but with intention. Koda watched from a short distance, his head slightly tilted, as if following each motion. Elena struck the flint. Once, twice. On the third attempt, the spark caught. A thin line of smoke rose, followed by a small, uncertain flame. She waited. Didn't rush it. The fire grew slowly, finding its place among the wood. The crackle came next, soft at first, then steady. Warmth followed, not strong, but enough. Elena sat back on her heels, watching it. For a moment, she didn't move. The light shifted in the room, flickering against the stone walls, pushing the shadows back just enough to make the space feel smaller. Koda stepped closer, drawn to the heat. He lowered himself near the edge of the light, his body stretched out, his eyes half closed. Relaxed. Truly relaxed. Elena noticed that. She hadn't seen him like that since before. Everything. She leaned back against the wall again, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. Not by something unseen. By her. By the fire. By the dog lying quietly nearby. Time passed. She didn't track it. The fire burned low, then was fed again. The light outside shifted slowly, the sky moving from pale morning to something brighter. At some point, she stepped outside again. This time not to gather wood, just to stand. The land stretched out the same as before. Nothing had changed. But something had. She turned back toward the building. From the outside, it still looked worn, still looked forgotten. But now she knew what was beneath it, what had been kept, what had been protected. A figure appeared at the edge of the road, distant at first, then closer. An older man walking slowly, hands in his pockets. He stopped a few yards away from the building, looking up at it, then at her. "You're the one who bought it," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded once. He looked at the structure again, his gaze lingering on the stone, the windows, the roofline. "Haven't seen smoke here in years," he added, glancing toward the chimney. Elena followed his gaze. A thin line of smoke drifted upward, barely visible against the sky. She hadn't noticed it before. The man stepped closer, but not too close, just enough to stand at the edge of the yard. "They used to say this place was finished," he said. "Not broken, just done." Elena didn't respond right away. Koda appeared beside her, silent, his posture calm but attentive. He didn't step forward, didn't need to. The man noticed him. Good dog, he said quietly. Koda didn't react. He simply stood there. The man nodded once, then looked back at Elena. Well, he said after a moment, looks like someone decided otherwise. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer advice. He just turned and walked back the way he came. Elena watched him go. Then she turned back toward the inn. The fire inside still burned. Koda stepped ahead of her this time, moving through the doorway without hesitation, without pause. She followed. Inside, the warmth held. The light flickered. The space felt different again. Not just used. Alive. Elena set another piece of wood into the fire, adjusting it carefully, making sure it caught. Her movements were slower now, more certain. She glanced once toward the center of the floor. The boards, the opening beneath. She didn't move toward it. Not today. It was no longer something she needed to prove. It was something she understood. Koda lay down again near the doorway, his head resting on his paws, eyes open but calm. Watching. Not guarding. Elena sat back against the wall, the firelight warming her hands. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass. Inside, the building held steady, and for the first time in a long time, nothing was pushing her out. Nothing was taking anything from her. The place had not welcomed her. Not at first. But now it wasn't asking her to leave. Time didn't move fast after that. It stretched. Days turned into something quieter, measured not by clocks, but by small things. How long the fire held, how far the light reached across the floor, how the wind sounded when it changed direction. Elena stayed. That alone changed everything. The first week, she worked in pieces, clearing one corner of the room, then another, sweeping dust into a pile with an old piece of board, carrying it outside, letting the wind take what it could. She didn't try to fix everything. Just enough. Enough to move, enough to sit. Enough to breathe without feeling like the building was closing in. Koda stayed close, not pressed against her leg anymore, but never far. He moved through the space like he understood it now, crossing the room without hesitation, pausing at the doorway to watch the road, lying near the hearth when the fire burned low. Sometimes he would glance toward the center of the floor, not tense, just aware. Elena noticed that, but she didn't open it again. Not yet. The cellar wasn't something that needed proving. It was something she carried now. The second week, she walked back toward town. Not for long. Just enough to find what she needed. A small store still open near the edge of the industrial strip, the same one she had passed before. The bell above the door rang softly when she entered. The woman behind the counter looked up, then paused. "You're the one out by the old inn," she said. Not a question. Elena nodded. The woman studied her for a moment, then reached under the counter and pulled out a small paper bag. "Didn't think anyone would stay there," she added. "Figured if you did, you'd need this." Inside the bag, matches. A small tin of oil. 2 worn candles. Elena held it for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said. The woman shrugged slightly, like it wasn't a big thing. "People used to stop there," she said. "Long time ago. My grandfather talked about it." Elena nodded again. She didn't explain, didn't need to. When she stepped back outside, Koda was waiting exactly where she left him, sitting near the edge of the sidewalk, his eyes scanning the street. When he saw her, he stood immediately. Not excited, just steady. They walked back the same way they came. The road felt shorter this time. The inn looked the same from a distance, but not to her. When she reached the door, she didn't hesitate. She stepped inside like she belonged there. Because now, she did. Weeks passed, then more. The changes were small. A repaired board here, a cleared space there, a second crate dragged closer to the hearth, a place to sit that didn't shift when she leaned. The fire burned more easily now. The chimney drew better after she cleared the worst of it. Smoke rose straight up instead of drifting back inside. The building responded slowly, like it had been waiting for someone to meet it halfway. One evening, as the light softened outside, a car stopped on the road. Not fast, not loud, just there. Elena heard it before she saw it. Koda lifted his head, then stood, moving toward the doorway. She followed. A man stepped out. Middle-aged, hands in his pockets. He looked at the building the way people look at something they remember, but aren't sure is real anymore. "You open?" he asked. Elena paused. The word hung there for a moment. Open. She looked back inside. At the fire. At the space she had cleared. At the place that had once been silent. Then she looked at the man again. "Not everything," she said, "but you can come in." He nodded once, stepped inside. Koda moved aside without blocking him, just watching. The man stood near the hearth, his hands held out slightly toward the warmth. "Smells different," he said quietly. Elena didn't answer. She just added another piece of wood to the fire. That night, he stayed a while. Didn't ask many questions. Didn't need answers. When he left, he nodded once more. "I'll come back," he said. Elena didn't ask when. She just watched him go. After that, others came, not many, one at a time, a man passing through, a woman who had heard something from someone else, a truck that slowed, then stopped. They didn't expect much, and she didn't offer more than she had. Warmth, a place to sit, something simple to eat when she could manage it. No questions. That was enough. Koda stayed by the door, not guarding, just present. Watching each person who entered, then settling once he decided they belonged there, even for a moment. Months passed. The seasons shifted. The dry grass outside turned softer. The air carried different smells. Inside, the inn changed slowly. Not new, not restored, but alive. The boards no longer echoed the same way. The walls held warmth longer. The fire found its place without being coaxed. Elena moved differently, too. Not careful, not uncertain. Steady, like someone who knew where things were. One evening, as the light faded and the fire burned low, she walked to the center of the room. The board still marked the spot. She stood there for a moment, then crouched. Her hand rested lightly on the wood. She didn't open it. Didn't need to. She knew what was below. The coins, the documents, the letter. The truth that had been left behind. But that wasn't what had changed her. She stood again, her eyes moving across the room. At the fire. At the door. At Koda, lying quietly near the entrance, his head resting on his paws, watching without tension. What had been hidden below wasn't just something buried. It wasn't just something saved. It was something that had waited. Not for the right person, not for the perfect moment, just for someone who had nowhere else to go and still chose to stay. Elena stepped back toward the hearth and sat down slowly. The firelight moved across her hands. Outside, the road stretched on, quiet as ever. Inside, the building held, not empty, not abandoned, and no longer waiting. Elena stayed by the hearth, her hands open to the heat, watching the way the fire settled into itself, steady now, like it had finally found its place again. Koda didn't look at the floor anymore. He didn't need to. He had already found what was hidden. Not just the cellar, not just the box, but the one thing Elena couldn't see that first night, that this place wasn't empty. It had just been holding its breath.
She thought about the sound beneath her, the one that kept her awake, the way she almost walked away from it, the way he didn't. Most people would ignore it, cover it up, told themselves it was nothing. But he stayed with it, stayed long enough for her to hear it still. Elena leaned back, eyes moving across the room, the walls boards, the quiet walls, the door that now opened more often than it slowed. She didn't come here looking for anything, no future, not a second chance, just a place to stand. But something under that floor had been waiting long before she ever lost everything, and somehow it waited for her to lose it. She reached down and rested her hand lightly on the board beneath her feet, not to open them, just to remember. Then she looked toward the door where Koda lay, calm, watching the road without guarding it anymore. And she wondered, if something in your life keeps calling out, quiet but steady, would you listen long enough to find out what it's trying to give up?